The ancient pocket watch trembled in Bulldog's massive hands as the gentle ticking filled the silence between them for the first time in 40 years. Across the workbench, the quiet man who had spent decades crafting timepieces for kings was about to reveal a secret hidden since 1890, a message from a grandfather who had never stopped loving the grandson he'd never known. Heinrich Muller had been counting every second at Millbrook Correctional for exactly 2,847,360 seconds when he first noticed the man they called Bulldog staring at his clockwork mechanisms with mathematical precision. Not because Heinrich was eager for freedom. He still had 1 year, 4 months, and 17 days remaining on his tax evasion sentence. He counted time in seconds because precision had always been his salvation. The difference between creating masterpieces that outlasted generations and producing meaningless objects that would break within months. At 61, Heinrich carried himself with the meticulous bearing of someone who had spent 43 years working with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, creating timepieces so perfect they could maintain accuracy for decades without adjustment. His silver hair was always perfectly trimmed, his hands bore tiny scars from working with springs and gears smaller than rice grains, and his eyes held the patient focus of someone who understood that true craftsmanship required absolute attention to detail that most people couldn't sustain for minutes. Heinrich Müller was not just any watchmaker. Before his reputation was destroyed by financial crimes born of desperation, he had been one of only 12 certified master chronometer craftsmen in the United States. He had learned his trade in Switzerland, under masters whose techniques dated back 3 centuries. He had created custom timepieces for heads of state, restored historical clocks for the Smithsonian Institution, and built mechanical chronometers so precise they were used to calibrate atomic clocks at the National Institute of Standards. His crime was born from pride that refused to accept failure and love that demanded perfection at any cost. When his workshop began struggling financially due to digital timekeeping's rise, Heinrich had falsified tax documents and created fraudulent insurance claims to fund his grandson's medical treatments for a rare genetic disorder. The boy had needed experimental therapies that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, treatments that Heinrich believed were as essential as the precise movements he crafted with his own hands. The investigation revealed a complex scheme involving overvalued antique timepieces, inflated repair estimates, and fabricated theft claims that had generated over $800,000 in illicit funds. Every penny had gone to medical expenses and establishing a trust fund that would ensure his grandson's continued care after Heinrich's inevitable imprisonment. The prosecutor had been merciless, describing Heinrich as a master manipulator who had exploited his reputation to defraud insurance companies and the federal government. What Heinrich hadn't expected was how losing access to precision tools would affect every aspect of his identity. For over 4 decades, his hands had created mechanical art that measured time with Swiss accuracy. In prison, he was reduced to working with improvised tools on damaged timepieces that other inmates had smuggled in or inherited from family members, broken watches and clocks that represented the only connections these men maintained to lives before their worlds collapsed. For the first 18 months of his sentence, Heinrich worked in the prison kitchen, washing dishes and preparing meals while his hands slowly lost the sensitivity that 40 years of micromanipulation had developed. He watched his dexterity deteriorate, felt his ability to sense minute mechanical variations fade, and gradually accepted that he would never again create the kind of timepieces that had made his name legendary among collectors and museums worldwide. The opportunity to work in the prison workshop came through bureaucratic oversight. The facility needed someone with mechanical experience to supervise equipment maintenance and assist with vocational training programs. Heinrich's background with precision machinery qualified him, even though the workshop's crude tools were impossibly distant from the specialized instruments he had once used to create mechanical masterpieces measured in microns rather than millimeters. The workshop was a cramped space filled with basic hand tools, salvaged electronics, and the accumulated detritus of failed repair attempts by well-meaning inmates who lacked knowledge to properly restore anything more complex than a toaster. But it gradually revealed itself as a laboratory where Heinrich could practice a simplified version of his craft, using techniques developed over centuries by clockmakers who had worked with far more primitive tools. Heinrich started by volunteering to repair broken timepieces that inmates brought him. Cheap digital watches with cracked displays, mechanical alarm clocks that had stopped working decades ago, even authentic vintage pieces that family members had entrusted to prisoners who didn't understand their value. Working without proper equipment forced Heinrich to rediscover fundamental techniques, to solve mechanical problems through pure understanding rather than relying on specialized tools. The work was frustratingly primitive compared to Swiss chronometer movements he had once assembled, but it was also revelatory. Stripped of technological assistance, Heinrich had to rely entirely on his understanding of mechanical principles, his ability to visualize how gears and springs interacted, his sensitivity to subtle sounds and resistances that indicated whether a mechanism was properly calibrated. Each successful repair was a small victory against institutional forces that sought to reduce human beings to mere custody units. Word of Heinrich's capabilities spread through Millbrook with characteristic speed of any service that provided genuine value in an environment where most needs went unmet. Inmates began approaching him with timepieces that carried emotional weight far beyond monetary value, watches inherited from deceased fathers, clocks that had marked anniversaries in homes that no longer existed, chronometers that represented last tangible connections to identities that imprisonment had stripped away. But Heinrich's growing reputation as someone who could restore broken timepieces also attracted attention from inmates who viewed any activity requiring patience and precision as potentially suspicious. In prison culture, men who spent hours working on intricate projects were sometimes suspected of manufacturing weapons, planning escapes, or engaging in activities that could threaten the delicate balance of power that kept violence from spiraling out of control. Marcus Bulldog Williams had controlled the flow of contraband services and manufactured goods in Cell Block C for over 6 years through a combination of intimidation and practical intelligence that made him both feared and essential to the prison's informal economy. At 6 feet 3 inches and nearly 280 pounds of muscle earned through decades of manual labor, Bulldog's physical presence was imposing enough to end most disagreements before they required violent resolution. Bulldog had earned his nickname not through aggression, but through tenacity. Once he decided something needed to happen, he pursued that objective with relentless determination that wore down opposition through persistence rather than force. He controlled the prison's underground economy, not through violence, but through superior organization, understanding exactly what services inmates needed and ensuring those services were provided efficiently and discreetly enough to avoid administrative interference. What bothered Bulldog about Heinrich's timepiece restoration wasn't the activity itself, it was how it encouraged men to think about time as something precious rather than something to be endured. In Bulldog's worldview, prison time was meant to be suffered rather than measured, survived rather than appreciated. Heinrich's precise restoration of broken clocks seemed to suggest that time had value, that moments mattered, that careful measurement of hours might serve purpose beyond marking progression toward release. But Bulldog was also struggling with something that had haunted him for over 15 years, the weight of family history he had never fully understood, and a legacy that died with his grandfather before Bulldog was old enough to ask questions that might have connected him to something larger than survival. His grandfather had been a railroad man, a conductor whose life had been measured in precise schedules and mechanical reliability, but Bulldog had never learned the stories that might have explained where he came from or what he might have inherited beyond a genetic tendency toward mechanical understanding. The confrontation came when Heinrich was repairing a delicate lady's wristwatch that had belonged to an inmate's deceased mother. Bulldog appeared in the doorway without warning, his massive frame blocking light and transforming the peaceful workspace into territory where dangerous conversations could unfold. "If it isn't Millbrook's newest clockmaker," Bulldog announced, "I hear you've been turning this workshop into some kind of Swiss timepiece factory." "I repair broken timepieces," Heinrich said simply. "Men bring me watches and clocks that have stopped working. I try to make them functional again using whatever tools are available." The response was delivered with straightforward honesty that had characterized Heinrich's approach to challenges throughout his career. "Make them functional again," Bulldog repeated, examining various timepieces scattered across Heinrich's workbench. "Most of these things stopped working years ago. Some probably haven't ticked since before the men carrying them got locked up in here." His voice carried curiosity rather than threat, suggesting this conversation might develop in unexpected directions. "Mechanical timepieces are remarkably resilient," Heinrich said calmly. "They can survive decades of neglect and still be restored to full functionality if you understand their construction and have patience to work through problems systematically. Time doesn't destroy good craftsmanship, it just reveals which components were built to last." "Time doesn't destroy good craftsmanship," Bulldog said skeptically. "That doesn't match my experience. Everything I've ever seen gets worn down, broken, forgotten. Nothing lasts forever, especially not the good things." The response revealed deeper issues about permanence, legacy, and whether anything valuable could survive the forces that destroyed lives and relationships. Heinrich noticed Bulldog unconsciously touching something in his pocket. "You're right that nothing lasts forever," Heinrich replied, "but some things are built well enough to last much longer than we expect, especially if someone takes time to maintain them properly. Good mechanical work can function for generations if it receives appropriate care." As he spoke, Bulldog's gesture became more obvious. "Family connections can be more resilient than we expect," Heinrich said carefully. "Sometimes the bonds exist even when communication has been severed. Sometimes people leave things behind that carry more meaning than we realize, until much later." His eyes moved toward the pocket that Bulldog had touched moments earlier.
He left me something, Bulldog said suddenly, words escaping before he could reconsider. A pocket watch. Old thing, probably worthless, but it was the only thing of his that made its way down to me. Hasn't worked in years, maybe decades. I've carried it around thinking maybe someday I'd find someone who could tell me something about it, about him, about what it might have meant. Heinrich felt familiar professional excitement. May I see it? He asked gently. I might be able to determine its age, manufacturer, and condition without doing anything that would damage it. Sometimes examining a timepiece can reveal information about its previous owner's life and work. Bulldog withdrew a tarnished pocket watch that had clearly been carried for years without maintenance. The case was scratched and dented, the chain missing several links, the crystal cracked. But Heinrich's expert eyes immediately identified details that transformed the damaged timepiece into something extraordinary. The case was gold-filled, the dial featured railroad-style Arabic numerals, and the case back bore engravings that could provide crucial information. This is remarkable, Heinrich said softly. This is an 1890 Hamilton Railway Special, 21-jewel movement, designed specifically for railroad conductors and engineers. These watches were manufactured to exacting standards because railroad safety depended on precise timekeeping. Your grandfather would have needed certification to carry a timepiece like this on duty. Heinrich carefully examined the caseback, his practiced eye deciphering heavily tarnished engravings.
As Heinrich continued his examination, his expression changed as he noticed something unexpected about the case construction. This case has been modified, he said carefully. There's a hidden compartment built into the back cover, a modification that would have required considerable skill to execute without damaging the movement. Someone added a secret storage space to this watch, probably to carry something small but important. Bulldog's entire body went rigid. Hidden compartment, he repeated slowly. You mean my grandfather deliberately modified this watch to hide something inside it? You mean there might be something in there that he intended for family members to find? The possibility that his grandfather had left a deliberate message seemed to transform Bulldog's understanding of their relationship. With Bulldog's permission, Heinrich spent an hour working with improvised tools to carefully access the hidden compartment without damaging its contents. The process required patience that would have tested experienced watchmakers, using gentle pressure to convince mechanisms sealed for decades to finally reveal their secrets. When the compartment opened with a barely audible click, Heinrich carefully extracted a small piece of paper folded into an impossibly compact square. The paper was yellowed but remarkably preserved, protected by the watch case from moisture and light. Heinrich handed the paper to Bulldog with trembling hands. Bulldog unfolded the paper with infinite care, revealing handwriting in careful script. My dear grandson, the note read, if you are reading this, it means the watch found its way to you as I hoped it would. Time heals all wounds, but love makes every second count. You carry the best of our family's strength, and I pray you find the courage to use it wisely. I have watched you grow with more pride than you can imagine. Your grandfather, Thomas Williams, conductor, Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, 1889–52. Bulldog's breakdown was immediate and complete. 40 years of emotional suppression collapsed as he held physical proof that his grandfather had not only known him but had loved him, had watched him with pride, had believed in his potential enough to create an elaborate mechanism for communicating across decades. The massive man who had intimidated countless inmates was reduced to sobbing as he absorbed the reality that someone had cared enough to leave a message spanning generations. He knew me, Bulldog whispered through tears. He watched me growing up. He was proud of me. He believed I could become something good. All these years I thought nobody in my family had ever cared about what happened to me, and he left this message telling me he loved me, telling me to use my strength wisely. Over the following weeks, an extraordinary partnership developed between Heinrich and Bulldog. The feared gang leader didn't abandon his position of influence, but he began using his organizational skills to protect and expand Heinrich's timepiece restoration program. Instead of viewing precision work as suspicious activity, Bulldog started promoting mechanical education as practical preparation for legitimate employment after release, understanding that skills requiring patience and attention to detail could translate to numerous career opportunities. Most remarkably, Bulldog became Heinrich's most dedicated apprentice, approaching timepiece restoration with the same methodical persistence that had made him effective as a prison leader. His mechanical aptitude, inherited from his grandfather but never previously developed, proved extraordinary when combined with Heinrich's expert instruction and his own desperate desire to understand the craft that had preserved his grandfather's message across 4 decades of separation. But Bulldog's most significant transformation came when Heinrich suggested that he try restoring timepieces for other inmates who had inherited broken watches from deceased family members. You understand something about family connections that I can't teach, Heinrich explained. Your own experience with discovering your grandfather's message gives you insight into why these restorations matter beyond mechanical function. You can help other men understand that broken doesn't mean worthless, that some things are worth the effort required to make them whole again. Bulldog's first attempt at independent restoration was revolutionary. Working on a damaged wristwatch that had belonged to an inmate's deceased father, he talked about his own experience with discovering family love that had been hidden but never destroyed. His willingness to be vulnerable about his emotional breakthrough gave other men permission to acknowledge that their own family connections might be more resilient than imprisonment had led them to believe. The program that Heinrich and Bulldog developed together became known throughout the correctional system as timekeepers, an approach to mechanical training that emphasized precision, patience, and understanding that good craftsmanship could preserve connections across generations. Bulldog's leadership gave the program credibility with men who might otherwise have dismissed technical education as irrelevant to their immediate survival concerns, while Heinrich's expertise ensured that the skills being taught were authentic and marketable. 6 months after their first confrontation, Bulldog approached Heinrich with a proposal that demonstrated how completely his understanding of legacy and family connection had evolved. "I want to write a letter to my grandfather," he said. "I know he's been dead for 30 years, but I want to tell him that I found his message, that I understand what he was trying to teach me, that I'm using my strength the way he hoped I would. I want to put that letter in his watch, in the same compartment where he left his message for me." Heinrich recognized the profound wisdom in Bulldog's request, the understanding that family communication could flow both ways across time, that expressions of gratitude and love could honor previous generations while inspiring future ones. Together they created a letter that matched Thomas Williams' careful script and thoughtful message, a response across decades that completed a conversation between grandfather and grandson that had been interrupted by death but never truly ended. When Heinrich was released after serving his full sentence, he left behind more than just a successful mechanical training program. He had helped create a culture where precision was valued as a form of meditation, where patience was understood as strength rather than weakness, where the most respected leader in the facility was someone who had learned to preserve connections rather than just managing territory through intimidation and fear. Bulldog still had 3 years remaining on his sentence, but he spent that time differently than he had spent the previous 6 years of incarceration. He earned certifications in mechanical repair and precision manufacturing, developed partnerships with companies that could provide employment opportunities for inmates with technical skills, and created comprehensive re-entry programs that helped men understand how their prison-developed abilities could translate to legitimate careers. 2 years after Heinrich's release, Bulldog sent him a letter that demonstrated the complete transformation of someone who had discovered that his family legacy was worth preserving and extending. "Master Heinrich," the letter read, "I wanted to tell you that I've been accepted into an apprenticeship program with a railroad restoration company. They're going to train me to restore vintage train clocks and mechanical systems for historical railways, but the most important thing is that I'm using my grandfather's watch to time my work sessions. Every tick reminds me that good craftsmanship honors the people who came before us and inspires those who come after us." Heinrich kept that letter framed in his rebuilt workshop, which he had established after his release, using tools and techniques that prison had taught him to appreciate in ways he never had when resources were unlimited. It served as a reminder that the most important timepieces were never just mechanical devices, they were vessels for carrying love across the years that separated generations, instruments for preserving connections that survived beyond individual lives. The letter continued with details about Bulldog's progress in his apprenticeship, how he had become the youngest master clockmaker in the Railroad Restoration Company's history, how he had started teaching mechanical skills to other former inmates, creating a network of craftsmen who understood that precision and patience were more than technical skills, they were forms of prayer, meditation, and hope. Years later, when collectors brought Heinrich damaged timepieces that carried emotional weight beyond their monetary value, he would tell them about the prison workshop where he learned that broken doesn't mean worthless, that some things are worth whatever effort is required to make them whole again. He would tell them about Bulldog, the man who discovered that his inheritance wasn't just a damaged watch but a message of love that had waited 4 decades to reach its intended recipient. Most of all, Heinrich would tell them about the lesson he learned in that makeshift workshop, that time doesn't heal wounds, love does. And sometimes it takes a master craftsman to show you that the most precious moments were hidden inside all along, waiting for someone with the right skills and sufficient patience to reveal the messages that connect us across generations, one careful restoration at a time. The strongest prisons are not made of concrete and steel. They are built from broken connections, abandoned hopes, and the belief that some relationships cannot survive the weight of time and circumstance. But Heinrich Müller learned in that improvised workshop that every person deserves to understand how love transcends time, that family bonds are more resilient than we imagine, that sometimes the most important conversations happen across decades through the patient work of skilled hands restoring what was thought to be permanently broken. When you teach someone that broken doesn't mean worthless, you're not just sharing technical knowledge, you're giving them permission to believe that healing is possible, that connections can be restored, that time is not an enemy but a vessel for carrying love between generations.
Because when a master craftsman opens a hidden compartment that has waited 40 years to reveal its secret, he's not just repairing a watch, he's proving that love finds a way to reach across any distance, survive any obstacle, and speak to hearts that have been waiting their entire lives to hear that they matter, they are cherished, and they carry within them the strength of all who came before.